The Devil's Pass diner
Please,
sat
I
like an
beg you,
oasis of
don't
light
hurt
against
me.
the Montana darkness.
I'll
Rain
do
pounded the metal
anything.
roof while thunder rolled across distant mountains. Inside, 15 men filled the corner booth. Leather vests stretched across broad shoulders, weathered faces, calloused hands. The Iron Veterans Motorcycle Club wasn't just passing through. They were coming home from their annual ride honoring fallen brothers who never made it back from foreign soil. Captain James Buck Buchanan sat at the head of the table. At 62, his frame remained solid as oak. Silver hair cropped military short, eyes that had seen 3 continents of combat still sharp, missing nothing. The former Green Beret commanded respect without demanding it. When Buck spoke, men listened. "Another round for the boys, Ellie," Buck called to the waitress, his voice carrying the gravel of too many desert deployments. The bikers' laughter filled the diner, drowning out the country music from the ancient jukebox. Plates of half-eaten steak and potatoes littered the table. These men had ridden 200 miles today through Montana's unforgiving terrain on their Harley-Davidsons. Buck's Road King Classic Midnight, black with subtle American flag, detailing, sat outside flanked by the others. 14 machines representing American engineering at its finest. Razor Buck's second-in-command was recounting a story from their deployment in Saudi Arabia. The former military police officer had a gift for storytelling, his hands painting pictures in the air, as he described the sandstorm that had nearly buried their forward operating base. "Sand in places I didn't know existed," he was saying, earning knowing chuckles from the veterans. "3 days we were stuck there, and when it finally cleared, our commanding officer walks out and says," the bell above the diner door chimed. None of the men paid attention until the small figure approached their table. Conversation died instantly. She couldn't have been more than 7 years old, thin as a rail, dirty blonde hair hung limp around a face too pale, a faded yellow dress 2 sizes too large. But it was her eyes that froze every man at that table. Old eyes, eyes that had seen things no child should see. The girl stopped 3 feet from Buck. Bruises peeked from beneath her collar. Her lip was split, but healing. "Please arrest me right now," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "I'm a criminal." 15 hardened men went completely still. Buck slowly turned in his seat to face her fully. "What's your name, darling?" he asked, his tone gentler than anyone had heard in years. "Sophie," she whispered. "Sophie," Buck repeated, as if testing the name. "Why do you think you need to be arrested?" The girl reached into her pocket with trembling fingers. She pulled out a half-melted chocolate bar, the wrapper torn and sticky. "Because I stole something really bad, and criminals go to jail." Buck exchanged glances with Razor. The former military police officer gave an imperceptible nod. "That's mighty honest of you, Sophie," Buck said. "When did you take this?" "Yesterday, from the gas station." She looked at her shoes. The man wasn't looking. Buck leaned forward, elbows on his knees to meet her eye level. "When did you last eat something, Sophie, before this candy bar?" The child's forehead wrinkled in concentration. She began counting on small fingers. "Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, 4 days." Razor's knuckles went white around his coffee mug. 4 days without food." Sophie nodded, still not meeting their eyes. "Why haven't you eaten in 4 days, Sophie?" Buck asked, keeping his voice level, despite the rage building inside him. "Can't say." "Why not?" Sophie shuffled her feet. A tear escaped despite her obvious effort to hold it back. "Because if I tell you, you might feed me, and then I can't go to jail where they give you 3 meals every day." The terrible truth hit every man at that table like a physical blow. This child was trying to get arrested because jail was the only place she knew she'd be fed. Buck felt himself transported back 30 years. Operation Desert Storm. The intelligence had been solid. Hostages held in a compound outside Basra. His 12-man Special Forces team infiltrated under cover of darkness. Buck led Alpha Element through the east entrance, while Razor took Bravo through the west. The firefight lasted less than 2 minutes. 4 tangos down. No American casualties. But in the back room, huddled in the corner, they found 3 hostages. A family. Father already dead. Mother bleeding out. And between them, a boy no older than 5 eyes, vacant with terror. Buck had carried that boy out himself, the child's arms locked around his neck so tight he almost couldn't breathe. The mother died before the medevac arrived. The image of those eyes haunted Buck's dreams for decades. "Where are your parents, Sophie?" Buck asked, pulling himself back to the present. "My dad died in Afghanistan when I was 5, she said. Another look passed between the veterans. A Gold Star child, daughter of a fallen soldier. What about your mom? She married Greg, Sophie said, her voice breaking. He doesn't like me very much. Buck noticed the bruises again, the way she flinched when he shifted in his seat, the way her eyes constantly darted to the exit. Those weren't injuries from playing too rough. Those were from fists, adult fists. Did Greg do this to you? Buck pointed at her black eye. Sophie went silent, staring at the floor. That was answer enough. Where is Greg now? Razor asked, his voice deadly quiet. Home with Mom, Sophie whispered. He said if I came back, he'd hurt me worse. Every biker at that table straightened. A collective tension filled the air like before a lightning strike. A stepfather beating a veteran's daughter was beyond unforgivable. How long have you been on the streets? Buck asked. 2 days, Sophie admitted. I slept behind the gas station dumpster. 15 men who had seen the worst humanity had to offer felt something break inside them simultaneously. Buck made a decision that would change everything. Okay, Sophie, we'll arrest you, but first we need to follow proper procedure. Hope flashed across her face. What procedure? Every criminal gets a last meal before jail, Buck said solemnly. It's the law. He turned to Ellie, the waitress, who had been hovering nearby, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. Bring this dangerous criminal the biggest cheeseburger you have. Fries, chocolate milkshake, and apple pie a la mode. Sophie's eyes widened. Really? Really, Buck confirmed. You need to keep up your strength in jail. It's tough there. As Sophie slid into the booth next to Buck, he caught Razor's eye and gave a subtle nod toward the back of the diner. Razor stood and walked toward the payphones, pulling a cell from his pocket. The Iron veterans might look like typical bikers to outsiders, but they were anything but typical. Each man had skills from his military days, skills that were about to be put to very different use than their original training. The clubhouse of the Iron Veterans was located in an old converted warehouse on the outskirts of town. The main room featured memorabilia from various conflicts spanning decades: Desert Storm, Somalia, Iraq, Afghanistan. Photos of men in uniform lined one wall, many with black ribbons across the corners. The fallen, never forgotten. The club had been formed 5 years earlier when Buck and his old war buddies realized they missed the sense of purpose military service had given them. Too many brothers had fallen through the cracks after coming home. Too many families were struggling when a soldier didn't return. They started with charity rides, fundraisers for veterans' hospitals, motorcycle escorts for military funerals. What began as a way to maintain the brotherhood forged in combat had evolved into something more, a mission to ensure no veteran or military family was left behind. Each of the 15 Iron veterans had been carefully selected. Not just any veteran could join. Buck insisted on men of character, men who understood that their service hadn't ended when they hung up their uniforms, men who still lived by the code that had guided them through war. Razor had been Buck's right hand since Desert Storm. The former military police officer had gone on to serve 20 years, retiring as a command sergeant major. His knowledge of military and civilian law made him invaluable. Doc had been a combat medic in Somalia, then Iraq. 3 Purple Hearts and countless lives saved. His hands could stitch a wound under fire or comfort a dying soldier with equal skill. Snake was their intelligence specialist. The youngest at 48, he had served with the Army's intelligence branch during Operation Iraqi Freedom. If information existed, Snake could find it. The others brought their own specialties: mechanics, communications, logistics. Together, they formed a unit as efficient as any special operations team. The motorcycles and leather were just the uniform of their new mission. Back at the diner, Sophie attacked her food like a starving wolf when it arrived. Buck had to remind her several times to slow down so she wouldn't get sick. While she ate, he made a show of asking her official criminal questions to keep her distracted while Razor worked his connections. Full name, Sophie Jean Williams, she answered between bites of burger. Age, 7 3/4. Father's name and rank. Sophie sat up straight, her pride momentarily replacing fear. Sergeant First Class David Williams, United States Army, 2nd Battalion, 75th Rangers Regiment. Buck felt his chest tighten. The Rangers were elite soldiers. If her father had been with the 75th, he'd been a warrior among warriors. Your daddy was a Ranger? Snake asked from across the table. Sophie nodded. He had a flag tattoo on his arm with "Rangers lead the way" under it. The military motto hit home with several of the vets who nodded in solemn acknowledgement. Your father was a brave man, Buck told her. You should be very proud. Mom used to say that too, before Greg. While Sophie ate, Razor returned to the table and slipped a note to Buck. His face remained impassive as he read the information. Greg Thompson married Angela Williams 2 years ago. Address 4827 Pine Ridge Road, about 12 miles from here. Criminal record, 2 arrests for domestic violence with his ex-wife. Charges dropped both times. Currently unemployed. Angela works 2 jobs to support the household. Buck's jaw clenched so hard his teeth hurt. This scumbag had a history of beating women and now was abusing a fallen ranger's daughter. In Buck's personal code, there were few crimes more despicable. When Sophie had cleaned her plate and was slowly working through a slice of apple pie bigger than her head, Buck excused himself and gathered his officers in the back hallway by the restrooms. "Snake, what else did you find?" Buck asked. Snake, whose technical skills had once tracked insurgent communications across the Middle East, had been quietly working his tablet since receiving Sophie's information. Sergeant Williams was killed by an IED outside Kandahar in 2022, posthumously awarded the Silver Star for actions saving 3 members of his squad. Wife Angela received full benefits, including the house they currently live in and his life insurance policy. Let me guess. Razor said this Greg character showed up not long after. 6 months later, Snake confirmed, classic predator targeting a vulnerable Gold Star family. Financial status, Buck asked. Angela's bank accounts have been nearly emptied over the past year. Regular withdrawals, my guess is Thompson is bleeding her dry. Buck turned to Doc. Your assessment of her injuries. Doc's face was grim. Defensive bruising on the forearms. Contusions consistent with being grabbed forcefully. The eye is about 5 days old, malnourishment evident. She's been denied food as punishment. And the mother, Razor asked? If he's beating the kid, he's almost certainly beating Mom too, Doc replied. Likely worse. Buck took a slow, deep breath, calming the rage that threatened to overwhelm his tactical thinking. Here's how we play this. We're not vigilantes, we're not criminals. We're veterans who look after our own. Sergeant Williams can't protect his family anymore. We will. He laid out a plan with the precision of a military operation. Snake would document everything with his camera and recording equipment. Doc would be prepared to provide medical assistance if needed. Razor would handle Thompson if things got physical. The rest would create a presence that couldn't be ignored or threatened. Questions, Buck asked when he finished. There were none. These men had followed him into combat zones. They knew how he operated. Sophie doesn't leave our sight, Buck added, no matter what happens. Buck stepped away from the group and made a private call. The contact in his phone was simply labeled resource. 3 rings, then a woman's voice answered. Sergeant Martinez. Lisa, it's Buck Buchanan. Captain, it's been a while. I need a favor. It's about a ranger's family. He quickly explained the situation. There was a long pause on the other end. David Williams, I knew him. He saved my life in Kandahar. Can you help? I'll be there in 30. Send me the address. Thank you, Sergeant. For a ranger's daughter, you don't need to thank me. Buck made one more call, this time to James Patterson at the Veterans Legal Foundation. The lawyer had helped numerous Iron veterans with everything from disability claims to legal troubles. He owed Buck after the club had provided security for the foundation's fundraiser last year when threats had been made. I need emergency legal assistance. Gold Star family. Abusive stepfather. Patterson didn't hesitate. Text me the details. I'll have emergency orders drawn up within the hour. When they returned to the table, Sophie had finished her pie and was looking drowsy, the first full meal in days, making her eyelids heavy. Are we going to jail now? She asked Buck. Soon, Buck promised. But first we need to visit your house to get your things. Every prisoner gets to bring one personal item. Fear flashed across Sophie's face. No, Greg will hurt you too. 15 bikers laughed at that idea, though there was no humor in the sound. Let him try, Razor said darkly. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving puddles reflecting the diner's neon sign. Buck lifted Sophie onto his Road King, carefully securing an extra helmet on her head. It was far too large, making her look even smaller. Hold on tight to me, okay? Buck instructed, showing her where to place her hands. The rumble of 15 motorcycles starting in unison echoed across the empty parking lot. Buck took point, Sophie secure against his back. Razor flanked his right with Snake on his left. The rest formed up behind in perfect staggered formation, headlights cutting through the darkness like an approaching army. Buck go out and help Bart remember another night, another mission. Kandahar Province, 1991. His team had been tasked with eliminating a high-value target, a bomb maker responsible for dozens of American casualties. The intelligence had been solid. The plan was sound. But war is chaos. They'd been halfway to the target when the call came through. Mission abort. The CIA had new information. The target had moved. But Buck knew better. His gut told him the intelligence was wrong. The target was still there, but someone higher up had other plans. He'd followed orders, turned his men around. 3 days later, an IED killed 4 Marines near the same location. The bomb maker had been there all along. That was the beginning of the end for Buck's military career. He started questioning orders, started trusting his gut over command. 5 years later, he was out, honorably discharged but effectively forced out for being difficult. Sophie's small hands gripping his jacket brought him back to the present. This time, there was no command to abort, no orders to follow except the ones his conscience gave him. Sophie gave directions in Buck's ear as they rode through the outskirts of town and up into the forested foothills. Pine Ridge Road wound through tall timber before opening to a clearing where a modest single-story house sat back from the road. An American flag hung in the window, faded but carefully displayed. Buck wondered if it was the flag from Sergeant Williams's funeral. The bikers parked in a semicircle in the driveway, headlights all pointing toward the front door. Before the engines even died, that door swung open. A man stood silhouetted in the light beer can in hand. Buck helped Sophie off the motorcycle. "Stay with Snake," he told her quietly. Snake immediately took Sophie's hand, leading her to stand safely behind the line of bikes. Buck approached the house with Razor and Doc flanking him slightly behind. Military formation, old habits. "What the hell is this?" the man in the doorway slurred. Greg Thompson was in his mid-30s, skinny but wiry, with the mean eyes of someone who enjoyed causing pain. "We're returning Sophie," Buck said calmly. Thompson's bloodshot eyes found Sophie hiding behind the bikers. "That little brat finally came back." He reached out as if to grab her. Buck caught his wrist and squeezed until Thompson yelped in pain. "We need to talk," Buck suggested in a voice that wasn't a suggestion. "Who the hell are you people?" Thompson demanded, trying to pull his arm free. "Friends of the family," Razor answered. A woman appeared in the doorway behind Thompson, and the bikers saw everything they needed to see. Angela Williams was once beautiful, but fear had hollowed her. Black eye, bruised arms, the defeated look of a beaten woman. "Sophie," she cried, pushing past Thompson and rushing down the steps. But Sophie didn't run to meet her mother. Instead, she shrank back, pressing against Snake's side. "You picked him over Daddy," she said quietly. Those words stopped Angela in her tracks as effectively as a physical blow. She swayed on her feet, and Doc quickly moved to steady her. "Ma'am, are you all right?" Doc asked, already assessing her injuries with practiced eyes. "I'm fine," she whispered automatically, the classic response of abuse victims. Thompson tried to act tough despite being surrounded by men who had faced down insurgents and terrorists. "Get off my property before I call the cops." "Please do," Buck replied. "I'd love to explain how you've been beating a war widow and her 7-year-old daughter." Thompson went pale. "You can't prove anything." That's when Snake held up his phone, showing the recording of Sophie describing the beatings. "Actually, we can prove everything." Thompson made a fatal mistake. He swung at Buck. The punch never landed. Buck caught his fist and twisted his arm behind his back, slamming him face first against the wall of the house. 30 years removed from active duty, Buck still moved with the precision of a Special Forces operator. "You like hitting kids?" Buck asked quietly. "How about trying someone your own size?" "Please don't hurt him," Angela begged. "He'll be worse after you leave." That stopped Buck cold. She was right. They couldn't guard this family forever. Thompson would take everything out on Angela and Sophie once the bikers rode away. "Pack your things," Buck told Angela. "You and Sophie are leaving right now." "I can't leave," Angela protested weakly. "I have nowhere to go." "Yes, you do," said a new voice. Everyone turned to see a woman in military dress uniform with sergeant stripes walking up the driveway. The Iron Veterans parted to let her through. "I'm Sergeant Lisa Martinez. I served with your husband in Afghanistan." Angela gasped. "David talked about you in his letters." "He saved my life in Kandahar," Lisa said. She looked at Thompson with undisguised disgust. "David Williams was a hero who died protecting others, and you're beating his wife and daughter." Lisa Martinez carried herself with the confidence of someone who had seen the worst the world had to offer and refused to flinch. Her uniform was impeccable. Combat infantry badge prominently displayed above her left breast pocket. 3 rows of ribbons telling the story of multiple deployments. The Ranger tab on her shoulder matching the one David Williams had worn. She hadn't been exaggerating. She and David Williams had served together, had fought together, had bled together. Thompson tried to break free from Buck's hold. 3 bikers closed in, making escape impossible. "Here's what's happening," Buck announced. Angela and Sophie are leaving, and you're never contacting them again. You can't kidnap my wife, Thompson shouted. Your wife? Lisa laughed bitterly. You mean David Williams' wife, who you've been torturing? She pulled out her phone. I have 20 members of David's unit ready to testify about what kind of man he was and what kind of scum would hurt his family. Angela found her courage for the first time. Standing straighter, she looked Thompson in the eye. I want a divorce. You'll get nothing from me, Thompson snarled. She'll get everything, said another voice. A man in a suit walked up the driveway. The bikers who had served in legal capacities recognized James Patterson, attorney for the Veterans Legal Foundation. He carried a leather briefcase and a demeanor that suggested he was about to enjoy his job immensely. Restraining order effective immediately, Patterson said, handing Thompson papers. And this is just the beginning. Thompson read the papers and went white. This says I have to leave the house. It's not your house, the lawyer corrected. It's Angela's house from her husband's life insurance, and you've been living there illegally. Patterson was in his early 60s with silver hair and the sharp eyes of a legal predator. He'd spent 30 years as a military prosecutor before retiring to help veterans navigate the complex legal system that often failed them. Mrs. Williams, he said, turning to Angela, I've reviewed your financial records. There's evidence of systematic theft and fraud. We can press charges immediately if you wish. The truth came out in pieces. Thompson had convinced Angela to marry him just to get access to her husband's military death benefits. He had systematically isolated her from friends, family, and veteran support groups. He had drained their accounts and pawned family heirlooms, including David's military medals. You married me for money, Angela asked in horror. Thompson's silence was confession enough. Buck released Thompson with a shove. You have 5 minutes to pack and leave forever. Or what? Thompson challenged, trying to reclaim some dignity. 15 bikers stepped forward as one unit. Or we come back when there's no witnesses, Razor said quietly. Thompson looked at the wall of leather and steel before him. He knew predators when he saw them, and these weren't prey. He ran inside, threw clothes in a bag, and minutes later peeled out in his truck, leaving a spray of gravel. Angela collapsed onto the porch steps, sobbing. I dishonored David's memory. No, Lisa said firmly, sitting beside her. You were a grieving widow who got manipulated by a con man. Lisa had seen it before, too many times. Predators targeting the vulnerable families of fallen soldiers. Women and children left adrift in their grief, easy targets for men who saw them as meal tickets. She'd been working with the Army's Survivor Outreach Services program for the past 3 years, specifically to prevent situations like this. David Williams had saved her life. The least she could do was try to save his family. Sophie finally ran to her mother. They held each other, crying while 15 bikers pretended something was in their eyes. Buck watched the reunion with a lump in his throat. He thought of his own family, the wife who had left after his 3rd deployment, the son who barely spoke to him anymore, the grandchildren he saw twice a year if he was lucky. The cost of service wasn't just paid by those who wore the uniform. Where will we go? Angela asked, looking lost. There's a program for Gold Star families, Lisa explained. Full housing assistance counseling and a support network of military families. Why didn't I know about this before? Angela asked. Because Thompson isolated you from everyone who could help, the lawyer explained. Classic abuser tactic. Patterson opened his briefcase, pulling out a folder of documents. Mrs. Williams, we can begin the process of recovering your assets immediately. The Veterans Legal Foundation provides free legal services to families like yours. Buck knelt beside Sophie. You're the bravest kid I've ever met. I'm not brave, Sophie protested. I ran away. Running from danger to find help isn't cowardice, Buck said. It's smart survival. He thought of the men he'd served with, the ones who had sought help when the nightmares became too much. They weren't weak. They were the strongest of all. My dad would be ashamed of me, Sophie said quietly. Lisa pulled out her phone and showed Sophie a photo. It was her father in uniform with his unit. Your dad once told me that his greatest fear wasn't dying in combat, Lisa said. It was leaving you unprotected. She looked at the bikers surrounding them. He'd be proud that you found protectors when you needed them most. Buck recognized himself in that photo, not literally but in spirit. He'd been that soldier once, willing to die for his country but terrified of what would happen to his family if he did. For every warrior, that was the real fear. Not death, but what came after for those left behind. Sophie looked up at Buck. Are you really going to arrest me for stealing? Here's your sentence, Buck said seriously. Community service every Sunday, washing motorcycles at our clubhouse. That's not jail, Sophie said, confused. It's better than jail, Buck explained. You get to learn about motorcycles and hang out with really cool guys. Sophie smiled for the first time. Can I bring my mom? Your mom's welcome anytime, Buck said, glancing at Angela, who was already looking stronger, surrounded by people who understood her loss and her struggle. The rain had started again, a gentle patter on the roof. The American flag in the window fluttered as the wind picked up. Inside, Angela and Sophie packed their essential belongings, helped by Lisa and Doc's wife, who had arrived after receiving a call. Buck stood on the porch with Patterson watching the activity. You know Thompson will be back, the lawyer said quietly. Let him try, Buck replied. I've seen his type before. They don't give up easily, especially when there's money involved. Neither do we, Patterson nodded. I'll expedite the divorce and asset protection proceedings. Get a permanent restraining order, but the legal system has its limits. That's why we have our system, too. The lawyer smiled grimly. I didn't hear that. That night, the Iron Veterans helped Angela and Sophie move into a furnished apartment that the Veterans Foundation provided. It was clean, safe, and nobody would hurt them there. But the Iron Veterans didn't stop there. They put word out about Greg Thompson. Every motorcycle club in 3 states knew his name, his face, and what he'd done. He wouldn't be welcome anywhere. Before leaving, Buck instructed Angela on the security system. Panic buttons connected directly to the local police and to the Iron Veterans Clubhouse. Window and door sensors, motion detectors. The apartment was as secure as any military installation. Why are you doing all this for us? Angela asked as Buck prepared to leave. Buck thought about her question. About the boy in Iraq whose eyes haunted him. About the men he'd lost over the years. About his own broken family. Because your husband can't, he said simply. And that's what brothers do. We stand in the gap. As Buck rode home that night, the image of Sophie's smile replaced the haunted eyes of that boy in Iraq. Some wounds never fully heal, but sometimes if you're lucky, you get a chance at redemption. The rain had stopped. Stars emerged between breaking clouds. The rumble of his Harley echoed off the mountains like distant thunder. For the first time in years, Buck felt the weight on his shoulders lighten just a little. Tonight they had done good. Tonight they had honored the oath they had all taken so many years ago. To defend, to protect, to serve. The mission continued. Buck pulled into his driveway, his bones aching from the long day. Inside his modest home, he went straight to the glass cabinet in his living room. His medals and decorations sat alongside photographs of men who hadn't made it home. He touched the frame holding the picture of his old unit, 12 men standing in the desert sun, young and invincible. Only 5 were still alive. We're still in the fight, boys, he whispered to the ghosts. Just a different battlefield. Buck sat heavily in his recliner, the leather creaking under his weight. He hadn't felt this kind of purpose since his last deployment. For years, the Iron Veterans had been doing good work, but tonight felt different. Tonight, they hadn't just honored the memory of their fallen brothers. They had actively stepped in to protect what one of those brothers had left behind. Buck picked up the small metal box on his side table, his most valuable possession. Inside was a collection of unit patches, dog tags, and photographs. Mementos of a 30-year military career spanning from Panama to Afghanistan. At the bottom of the box was a worn photograph. A young Buck in desert camo holding a small boy. Iraq, 1991. The hostage rescue. He'd never learned what happened to that child after the medevac took him away. That lack of closure had haunted him for decades. Sophie's face now overlaid that memory. This time he knew exactly what would happen to her. This time he could make sure she was protected. Maybe that was what redemption looked like. Not erasing the past, but finding a way to make peace with it through present actions. Buck replaced the photograph and closed the box. For the first time in years, he slept without nightmares. Across town in the apartment provided by the Veterans Foundation, Angela Williams sat at the kitchen table long after Sophie had fallen asleep. The events of the day had left her stunned. For 2 years, she had been sinking deeper into a fog of fear and shame. Greg had isolated her so gradually she hadn't realized what was happening until it was too late. After David died, she had been drowning in grief. Greg had seemed like a lifeline, charming, attentive, understanding. By the time his true nature emerged, she was already trapped. The verbal abuse came first, then the physical. She'd endured it, telling herself it was her fault that she deserved it for dishonoring David's memory. But when Greg started hurting Sophie, something inside her had begun to resist. She hadn't been strong enough to leave, but she had started secretly setting aside money. $5 here, $10 there. hidden in a hollowed-out book on her nightstand. Not enough yet, but eventually she had told herself. Eventually they would escape. Now sitting in this clean, safe apartment, surrounded by people who actually cared about her. And Sophie Angela felt a strange mixture of relief, gratitude, and shame. Relief to be free of Greg. Gratitude to the Iron Veterans and Sergeant Martinez. And shame that she hadn't been able to protect her daughter sooner. She opened her purse and took out the photo of David she always carried. Her husband in his ranger uniform, proud and strong. She traced his face with her finger. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry I let this happen." But even as the tears came, she felt something else stirring. Determination. Greg had taken nearly everything from her, but he hadn't taken her completely. There was still enough of the woman David had loved left inside her to fight back, to rebuild, to create a life worthy of her husband's sacrifice. "I'll make you proud," she promised the photograph. "I'll raise Sophie to be strong, like you." She put the photo away and went to check on her daughter. Sophie was sleeping peacefully for the first time in months. No whimpering, no nightmares. Just the deep, restful sleep of a child who finally felt safe. Angela smoothed the hair from Sophie's forehead and placed a gentle kiss there. "We're going to be okay," she whispered. And for the first time in 2 years, she almost believed it. The next morning, Buck called an emergency meeting of the Iron Veterans. All 15 members gathered at the clubhouse, coffee in hand, as Buck outlined what had happened with Sophie and Angela. "This isn't over," he told them. "Thompson will be back. Men like him don't give up easily, especially when there's money involved." "Let him try," Razor said, cracking his knuckles. "We need to be smarter than that," Buck cautioned. "We help this family legally properly. We do this right." He laid out a plan, round-the-clock security for the apartment until they were sure Thompson had left the area. Legal assistance for Angela to regain control of her finances and finalize the divorce. Counseling for both mother and daughter to help them process the trauma. "And one more thing," Buck added. "Sophie mentioned that Greg pawned her father's military medals and dog tags. I want them found and returned." The Iron Veterans nodded in agreement. For a soldier, those items were sacred. Their return would be a powerful symbol of restoration for the family. "I've got contacts at pawn shops across 3 states, Snake offered. "I'll start making calls. And I'll check with my buddies at the VFW and American Legion," added Gunny, their oldest member at 70. "Get the word out." Buck smiled. These men might be retired from active duty, but they still operated like a well-oiled military unit. Each with his role, each with his mission. "One last thing," Buck said, his expression serious. "This isn't just about Sophie and Angela. How many other Gold Star families are out there struggling? How many other kids like Sophie don't have anyone to turn to?" The room fell silent as each man contemplated the question. "I propose we expand our mission," Buck continued. "Not just charity rides and funeral escorts. Active outreach and support for military families, especially those who've lost someone." "You're talking about a major commitment," Razor pointed out. "We're not exactly a large organization." "No, but we have skills, connections, resources, and most importantly, we understand what these families are going through in a way civilians can't." One by one, the Iron Veterans nodded their agreement. They had all seen the cost of service, had all lost brothers in arms, had all struggled with the transition back to civilian life. "All in favor?" Buck asked. 15 hands went up without hesitation. Then it's settled. The Iron Veterans Protection Program begins today. Later that afternoon, Buck rode to the apartment to check on Sophie and Angela. He found them sitting with Lisa Martinez at the kitchen table, going through paperwork for the Gold Star Family Support Program. "The good news," Lisa was saying, "is that we can recover most of your benefits. The VA has emergency funds available for situations exactly like yours." Angela looked up as Buck entered. "Captain Buchanan," she greeted him. The fear in her eyes had diminished, replaced by cautious hope. "Just Buck, ma'am," he corrected gently. "I left the rank behind a long time ago." "Buck," she amended. "I don't know how to thank you and your men for what you did last night." "No thanks needed. Your husband served his country with honor. The least we can do is make sure his family is protected." Sophie came running from the bedroom. "Buck," she exclaimed, throwing her arms around his waist. The old soldier was momentarily startled by the display of affection, then awkwardly patted her back. "Hey there, criminal. Ready to start your community service?" Sophie nodded eagerly. "Can we go now?" Buck laughed. "Not today. Today you and your mom need to get settled. But Sunday morning I'll come pick you both up. That work for you, Mrs. Williams?" "Angela, please," she insisted. "And yes, that would be fine." As Buck turned to leave, Sophie tugged on his jacket. Buck, is Greg coming back? Buck knelt down to her level. I don't think so. But if he does, you call me right away, day or night. You've got my number by the phone. But what if he comes when you're not here? Buck pointed to the security panel by the door. See that red button? You press that, and the police come running. And this one, he indicated a blue button, calls our clubhouse directly. One of us will always answer, day or night. Sophie studied the panel seriously, then nodded. Okay, you're safe now, Sophie, I promise. As Buck rode home, he considered the promises he had made throughout his life. To his country, to his men, to his family. Some he had kept, some had been beyond his control. But this promise to Sophie he intended to keep no matter what. The week passed quietly. Angela began counseling through the VA program. Sophie started at a new school closer to the apartment. The Iron veterans maintained their discreet surveillance, watching for any sign of Thompson. Sunday morning arrived bright and clear. Buck pulled up to the apartment on his Harley to find Sophie waiting impatiently on the steps. Angela stood behind her, looking rested for the first time since they had met. Ready for duty? Buck asked Sophie. Yes, sir, she replied with a salute that was surprisingly crisp for a 7-year-old. Buck returned the salute solemnly. Very good, Private Williams. He helped them both onto his motorcycle, making sure their helmets were secure before starting the engine. The Iron Veterans Clubhouse was alive with activity when they arrived. Motorcycles lined up in neat rows. Men in leather vests grilling burgers and hot dogs. Music playing from speakers mounted on the wall. What's all this? Angela asked. I thought it was just going to be motorcycle washing. Well, Buck said with a shrug, the boys thought Sophie's first day of community service deserved a proper welcome. Sophie's eyes were wide as she took in the scene. All these motorcycles are for me to wash. Buck laughed. Not all at once. We'll start with just one today, mine. He led them to where his Road King Classic stood apart from the others. Beside it, a small step stool, bucket of soapy water, and soft cloths had been arranged. First lesson, Buck said seriously. A motorcycle isn't just transportation, it's freedom, respect, tradition. You wash it like you're honoring all three. For the next hour, Buck patiently showed Sophie how to properly clean each part of the motorcycle, how to use different cloths for different surfaces, how to reach the hard-to-clean areas. Sophie absorbed every word, her face serious with concentration. Meanwhile, Angela found herself surrounded by the wives and girlfriends of the Iron veterans. Women who understood loss, who had waited anxiously during deployments, who had welcomed home men changed by war. He never talks about it, one woman was saying. 30 years since Desert Storm and Joe still wakes up screaming sometimes. The others nodded in understanding. David was the same way, Angela said quietly. After his first tour in Afghanistan, he would check the locks 3 times before bed, jump at loud noises. The hypervigilance, another woman said knowingly. Mike still has to sit with his back to the wall in restaurants. Angela felt something loosen inside her chest. For 2 years, she had been alone with her memories of David, with her grief, with her struggles to understand the man who had returned from war, different from the boy she had married. Here among these women, she didn't have to explain. They already knew. By the end of the day, Sophie had washed Buck's motorcycle to his exacting standards, eaten her weight in hot dogs and potato chips, and fallen asleep on a couch in the clubhouse, surrounded by leather-clad bikers who moved quietly around her so as not to wake her. Angela watched her daughter sleep, a peace settling over her that she hadn't felt since the day the uniformed officers had appeared at her door to tell her David wasn't coming home. She's a strong kid, Buck said, joining her. Like her father must have been. David was the strongest person I ever knew, Angela confirmed. Not just physically. He had this moral strength, this certainty about right and wrong. Buck nodded. The best soldiers usually do. I was so lost after he died, Angela admitted. I couldn't figure out how to live without him, how to raise Sophie alone. You don't have to do it alone anymore. Angela looked around at the clubhouse, at the men and women who had welcomed them so completely. No, I guess I don't. That night, after Buck had driven them home and made sure they were safely inside, Angela found Sophie sitting on her bed holding a photograph of her father. I miss Daddy, Sophie said. Angela sat beside her. I do too, every day. Do you think he knows about Buck and the Iron veterans, about how they helped us? Angela put her arm around her daughter. I think your daddy made sure they found us. I think he's still looking out for us, just in a different way. Sophie considered this, then nodded, accepting the explanation with a child's simple faith. I'm glad we're not with Greg anymore. Me too, baby. Me too. As Sophie drifted off to sleep, Angela went to the living room window. Outside, parked discreetly across the street, was a motorcycle. One of the Iron veterans keeping watch. Tomorrow, it would be someone else, and the day after that, until they were certain Thompson was gone for good. She felt tears spring to her eyes, but these weren't tears of fear or despair. They were tears of gratitude. For the first time in 2 years, Angela Williams didn't feel alone. Back at his home, Buck sat on his porch nursing a beer and watching the stars come out. His phone rang. Buchanan. "We found them," Snake's voice came through. "David Williams dog tags and medals. Pawn shop in Billings. Owners holding them for us." Buck felt a weight lift from his shoulders. "Good work. I'll drive up tomorrow to get them." "Already handled. Gunny's grandson lives in Billings. He's picking them up first thing in the morning. Should have them by afternoon." "Perfect. We'll present them to Angela and Sophie next Sunday." Buck ended the call and took another sip of his beer. The mission was going well. Better than he had expected. But there was still the matter of Thompson. Men like that didn't give up easily, especially not when money was involved. As if on cue, his phone rang again. This time it was Razor. "Thompson's back in town, asking questions at the Broken Spoke bar." Buck's jaw tightened. "What kind of questions?" "About Angela. About where she might be staying." "Anyone talking?" "Not to him, but he's offering money now." Buck considered his options. They could confront Thompson directly. Make it clear that coming near Angela or Sophie would be the last mistake he ever made. But that might only escalate the situation. Keep eyes on him, Buck decided. But don't engage. I want to know every move he makes, every person he talks to. Roger that. Buck ended the call and stared into the darkness. The peaceful resolution he had hoped for was looking less likely. Thompson was clearly not going to simply walk away. The man was obsessed either with Angela herself or with the money he thought he could get from her. Either way, he was a threat, and Buck had promised Sophie she would be safe. He picked up his phone and made one more call. "James, it's Buchanan. We've got a problem." Patterson, the Veterans Legal Foundation lawyer, listened as Buck explained the situation. "I can expedite the protective order," the lawyer said when Buck had finished. "Have it served immediately." But honestly, Buck men like Thompson don't respect legal documents. "I know, that's why I'm calling. We need to go on offense, dig into his past, find leverage." "What are you suggesting?" "Those domestic violence charges, that got dropped. There must be a reason. Was he connected? Did he threaten the victims? I want to know everything about this guy, every dirty secret, every weakness." There was a pause on the other end. "That's walking a fine line, Buck. I'm not suggesting anything illegal, just thorough." Patterson sighed. "I'll see what I can find. But Buck, be careful. Don't give this guy any ammunition to use against you or the Iron veterans." "Understood. Thanks, James." Buck ended the call and went inside. In his study, he opened his laptop and began his own research into Greg Thompson. As a former Special Forces operative, Buck had learned long ago that knowledge was often the most powerful weapon. By dawn, he had a clearer picture of the enemy they were facing. Thompson had a pattern. He targeted vulnerable women, particularly those with access to money. He charmed them, isolated them, then began the abuse. When they were completely under his control, he drained them financially before moving on. Angela wasn't the first. According to Buck's research, there had been at least 3 others before her. All followed the same pattern. None had pressed charges, likely out of fear or shame. Buck picked up his phone again. "Snake, I need you to track down some people for me." The news of Greg Thompson's arrest spread quickly through the Iron Veterans Network. Buck received the official confirmation the next morning from his contact at the county sheriff's office. Thompson was being held without bail on multiple charges: violation of a restraining order, stalking felon, in possession of a firearm, and parole violations. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for the following week, but given the evidence and Thompson's prior record, he was looking at a minimum of 2 years in state prison. Buck shared the news with Angela and Sophie over breakfast at their apartment. He had brought donuts, a small celebration that made Sophie's eyes light up with childish delight. "So Greg is gone for good?" Sophie asked, chocolate frosting rimming her mouth. "For a long time," Buck confirmed. "And when he gets out, the restraining order will still be in place. He won't be able to come near you or your mom." Angela sat quiet, processing the information. The relief was evident in her posture, in the way her shoulders relaxed for perhaps the first time since Buck had met her. But there was something else there, too. A wariness, as if she couldn't quite believe that the nightmare was truly over. "What happens next?" she finally asked. "You and Sophie rebuild your lives," Buck said simply. "The Gold Star Family Program will continue to provide housing assistance. The VA has resources for education if you want to go back to school. The Veterans Legal Foundation will make sure all the legal issues are handled properly. And the Iron Veterans? Sophie asked around a mouthful of donut. Buck smiled. We'll still be around. You've got community service every Sunday, remember? Sophie nodded solemnly. I remember. Buck turned back to Angela. The immediate danger is past, but we won't disappear on you. David was one of our brothers in arms. That makes you and Sophie family. Angela's eyes filled with tears. I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done. No thanks necessary. Just live your lives well. That's how you honor David's memory. As Buck was leaving, Sophie ran up and hugged him fiercely. The unexpected display of affection caught him off guard, but after a moment's hesitation, he returned the embrace. See you Sunday, Buck, she said. Count on it, kid. Back at the Iron Veterans Clubhouse, Buck called a meeting to brief everyone on the situation. The 15 core members gathered in the main room, coffee cups and occasional beers in hand despite the early hour. Thompson's locked up, Buck began. He'll be inside for at least 2 years. Probably longer given his record and the evidence Elizabeth Carter provided. The men nodded in satisfaction. That's the good news, Buck continued. The better news is that Angela and Sophie are starting to heal. The Gold Star Family Program is providing excellent support. Sophie's doing well in her new school. The immediate mission has been accomplished. So we're standing down, Razor asked. Buck shook his head. No, we're expanding. The Williams case got me thinking. How many other Gold Star families are out there struggling? How many other kids like Sophie don't have anyone to turn to? The room fell silent as each man contemplated the question. I propose we formalize what we've been doing. Create an actual program within the Iron Veterans. Outreach support protection if necessary. For families of fallen soldiers who need help. That's a big undertaking, Gunny noted. We're not exactly flush with resources. We have what matters, Buck countered. Skills, experience, understanding, and most importantly, we have connections throughout the veteran community. He moved to a whiteboard and began outlining his vision. The Iron Guardians program would identify Gold Star families in need, assess their situations, and provide appropriate support. This could range from simple friendship to legal assistance to physical protection in extreme cases like the Williams family. We start small, Buck explained. One family at a time. Build our reputation, expand our network. Eventually, we could partner with other motorcycle clubs across the country. The discussion continued for hours, hammering out details, assigning responsibilities, addressing potential challenges. By noon, the framework was in place. Snake would build a secure database. Doc would coordinate with VA medical services. Razor would handle security assessments, each man bringing his particular skills to bear on the mission. As the meeting broke up, Razor pulled Buck aside. You know what this means, right? You're not really retiring anytime soon. Buck shrugged. Wasn't much good at retirement anyway. Too quiet. Too much time to think. Razor nodded in understanding. Most veterans struggled with the transition to civilian life. The lack of purpose, the absence of the brotherhood that had defined their existence. The Iron Veterans had been created partly to address that void, but this new mission gave it even more meaning. Just don't burn yourself out, Razor cautioned. You're not 30 anymore. Buck laughed. Neither are you, old man. The next few weeks fell into a rhythm. Angela began training for a job with the VA hospital, ironically helping other military families navigate the complex benefits system that had failed her after Greg isolated her. Sophie continued her community service, every Sunday graduating from washing motorcycles to learning basic motorcycle maintenance under Razor's patient tutelage. Buck divided his time between developing the Iron Guardians program and checking in regularly with Angela and Sophie. He found himself looking forward to those visits, to Sophie's enthusiastic updates about school and Angela's increasingly confident plans for the future. One Sunday, as Sophie was carefully polishing chrome under Razor's supervision, Angela approached Buck with an unusual request. I want to learn how to ride, she said, gesturing toward the motorcycles lined up outside the clubhouse. Buck raised an eyebrow. A motorcycle? Angela nodded. David always wanted one. Talked about buying a Harley when he got back from his last deployment. She swallowed hard. He never got the chance. I think maybe it's something I could do to honor his memory. And honestly, I need something that's just for me. Something that makes me feel strong. Buck studied her for a moment, seeing the determination in her eyes. It's not easy. Takes practice. Commitment. I've got time, Angela said with a small smile. And I'm surrounded by excellent teachers. Buck nodded slowly. All right, we'll start with basic motorcycle safety. Work up from there. And so Angela's education began. Each Sunday after Sophie's community service, Buck, or one of the other veterans, would spend an hour teaching Angela the fundamentals of motorcycle operation. They started with a small 250cc bike perfect for beginners, letting her practice in the clubhouse parking lot until the controls became second nature. Angela proved to be natural. Her initial nervousness gave way to growing confidence as she mastered the clutch, the throttle, the subtle balance required to maneuver the machine. Buck watched her progress with quiet pride, recognizing the healing that was taking place. Angela was reclaiming her life one decision at a time. 6 weeks after Thompson's arrest, Buck received a call from James Patterson, the Veterans Legal Foundation lawyer. "Just got word from the DA's office," Patterson said without preamble. Thompson took a plea deal. 3 years for the weapons charge and parole violations. No possibility of early release. 3 years, Buck repeated. That's good news. There's more. The restraining order has been made permanent. When he gets out, he can't come within 1,000 feet of Angela or Sophie. Can't contact them in any way. First violation sends him straight back to prison. And the financial situation, that's the best part. We've recovered most of what he took from Angela's accounts. The house is officially back in her name. The VA has reinstated all of David's benefits. Financially, they're going to be okay. Buck felt a weight lift from his shoulders. Thanks, James, for everything. Just doing my job. How's the Iron Guardians program coming along? Slowly but surely, we've identified 3 more families in need of support. Nothing as extreme as the Williams case, thankfully. Mostly just folks who need a hand navigating the system, a bit of practical help. Let me know if you need legal assistance. The foundation is behind you 100%. Buck hung up and immediately called Angela to share the good news. Her relief was palpable even over the phone. "It's really over," she said, her voice catching. "We can truly move forward now." "You already were," Buck told her. "This just makes it official." The following Sunday, Angela arrived at the clubhouse with a surprise of her own. "I passed my motorcycle license test," she announced proudly, holding up the newly minted license. First try. The Iron veterans erupted in applause and congratulations. Razor produced a small cake with "Born to Ride" written in frosting, making everyone laugh. Sophie beamed with pride at her mother's accomplishment. "Now you need a bike of your own," Buck said. Angela shook her head. "That's still a ways off. They're expensive, and I'm just getting back on my feet financially." Buck exchanged glances with Razor and the others. "Come out back for a minute. There's something we want to show you." He led Angela and Sophie behind the clubhouse where a motorcycle sat covered with a tarp. With a flourish, Buck pulled the tarp away, revealing a gleaming Harley-Davidson Sportster midnight blue with subtle silver accents. Angela gasped. "What is this?" "Your bike," Buck said simply. "The Iron veterans chip in to help our own." Angela circled the motorcycle in disbelief. "I can't accept this. It's too much." "It's not new," Razor explained. "It belonged to Mike's widow. She wanted it to go to someone who would appreciate it. Mike had been one of their own killed in a crash 2 years earlier. His widow had remained close to the Iron veterans, knowing how much the Brotherhood had meant to her husband. "We rebuilt the engine," Buck added. "Put on new tires. It's solid, safe, perfect for a beginner who's ready to move up from a 250. Sophie was bouncing with excitement. "Mom, you have a motorcycle. Can I ride with you?" "Not for a few years, young lady," Buck said firmly. "Your mom needs to get plenty of experience first." Angela ran her hand along the fuel tank tears in her eyes. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll ride with us next weekend," Buck suggested. "Nothing crazy, just a short run through the mountains. Get a feel for the open road." Angela looked up, a new light in her eyes. "I'd like that very much." The next Saturday dawned clear and cool, perfect riding weather. Angela arrived at the clubhouse in the new riding gear the Iron veterans had helped her select: armor, jacket, proper boots, full-face helmet. No shortcuts on safety. Buck took her through a final checklist, making sure she was comfortable and confident before they set out. 5 of the Iron veterans would accompany them on this first ride, positioned strategically to keep Angela protected from traffic. "Remember," Buck instructed, "ride your own ride. Don't try to keep up or push beyond your comfort zone. We'll match our pace to yours." Angela nodded, excitement and nervousness competing in her expression. She started the Sportster, the engine rumbling to life beneath her. Buck could see the moment the vibration connected with something inside her, the smile that spread across her face, telling him everything he needed to know. They rode for 3 hours, following scenic back roads that wound through forests and meadows. Angela grew more confident with every mile, her posture relaxing, her handling of the bike becoming more fluid. By the time they returned to the clubhouse, she was transformed, flushed with the unique freedom that only a motorcycle can provide. That was, she searched for words as she removed her helmet. I've never felt anything like it. Buck smiled, remembering his own first real ride decades ago. Nothing else quite like it. The wind, the road, the machine, all working together. David would have loved this, she said softly. It feels like he was with me somehow. Buck nodded. He was. As spring turned to summer, Angela became a regular on the Iron Veterans rides. Sophie spent those days with other military kids in a program organized by Sergeant Martinez, building friendships with children who understood the unique challenges of being from a Gold Star family. The Iron Guardians program grew steadily. Word spread through veteran networks and families in need began reaching out. Most situations were straightforward, helping a widow navigate the VA benefits system, assisting a struggling family with home repairs, providing transportation to medical appointments. But occasionally more serious cases emerged. In July, Buck received a call from a veterans advocacy group in a neighboring state. A Gold Star family was being harassed by a local drug dealer who was pressuring them to sell their property. The local police were either unwilling or unable to help. Buck brought the case to the Iron Veterans that evening. This is exactly the kind of situation the Iron Guardians program was created for, he explained. A family under threat, authorities not responding, clear and present danger. The discussion was brief. Every man volunteered for the mission. Buck selected 6, including himself, Razor, and Snake. They would leave the next morning, assess the situation firsthand, and determine the appropriate response. Angela was at the clubhouse that evening helping organize a fundraiser for the Iron Guardians program. She overheard enough to understand what was happening. You're going to help another family, she said when Buck stepped outside for some air. That's the plan. Initial assessment first. See what we're dealing with. Angela was quiet for a moment. Will it be dangerous? Buck considered sugarcoating the truth, then decided against it. Could be. Drug dealers usually are. But we're not going in blind or unprepared. Like you did for us, Angela said softly. Similar, though every situation is different. Angela looked at him, her expression serious. Be careful, Buck. Sophie and I, we'd be lost without you. The simple admission caught Buck off guard. He had grown close to Angela and Sophie over the past months, but he hadn't fully realized how much they had come to depend on him. Not just for protection or practical help, but for emotional support, for stability. I'm always careful, he assured her, and I've got good men with me. The next morning, the 6 Iron Veterans set out for the neighboring state, their motorcycles loaded with camping gear for the overnight trip. Buck rode point as always, his mind already working through potential scenarios and responses. They reached the small town by early afternoon and made contact with their local liaison, a former Marine who ran the community center. He briefed them on the situation. The Gold Star family in question was the Mortons. John Morton had been killed in Afghanistan 3 years earlier, leaving behind his wife Karen and 10-year-old son Tyler. They lived on a small farm that had been in John's family for generations. The property had become valuable when a new highway was planned nearby. Developers were buying up land, and a local criminal named Ray Dalton was pressuring holdouts to sell. The Morton's farm was particularly valuable due to its location and water rights. Dalton started with offers, the liaison explained. When Karen refused to sell, the intimidation began. Vandalism, anonymous threats. Then last week their barn was burned down. Police say they can't prove who did it. Buck's jaw tightened. Where are the Mortons now? Still at the farm, Karen refuses to leave, says it's the only connection Tyler has to his father. We need to meet with them, Buck decided. Assess the security situation. Then we'll determine next steps. The Mortons' farm was 5 miles outside town down a long gravel road that left the Iron Veterans' motorcycles covered in dust. The farmhouse was modest, but well-maintained. A charred structure that had once been a barn stood 100 yards away. Buck noted with professional interest that it was positioned where a fire would be unlikely to spread to the house. Targeted intimidation, not an attempt to cause serious harm, yet. Karen Morton met them on the porch, shotgun in hand. She was in her late 30s with the weathered look of someone who worked the land. Her eyes were wary, but not fearful. You the bikers Jim called about? She asked, referring to their liaison. Buck nodded. Iron Veterans Motorcycle Club. We're all former military. We help Gold Star families dealing with difficult situations. Karen studied them for a long moment, then lowered the shotgun slightly. John was Army, 82nd Airborne. We know, Buck said. I served with the 82nd in Panama. Good outfit. That seemed to satisfy her. Come in then. Tyler's at school. Be home in an hour or so. Inside, Karen offered coffee and explained her situation in more detail. Dalton was well known in the area, a businessman with criminal connections who had been buying up property for the highway development. Most sold willingly for his generous offers. Those who resisted faced escalating pressure. Why not sell? Razor asked bluntly. Take the money and start fresh somewhere else. Karen's expression hardened. This land has been in John's family for 4 generations. He died believing Tyler would inherit it someday. I won't be the one to break that chain. Buck nodded in understanding. To military families, legacy and tradition held profound importance. Tell us about the threats, he prompted. The pattern, the timing. Karen described a methodical campaign of intimidation. It had started with late-night phone calls, then fence posts damaged, livestock frightened, anonymous letters suggesting accidents could happen. Finally, the barn fire a week ago. The police, Snake asked. Sheriff's Dalton's cousin by marriage, Karen said bitterly. Says he can't find any evidence connecting the incidents to Dalton. Suggests I should consider the generous offer before something worse happens. Buck exchanged glances with Razor. Corrupt local law enforcement complicated matters significantly. We need to see the property, Buck decided. Assess security vulnerabilities. Karen led them on a tour of the farm. Buck and his team evaluated it with professional eyes, noting access points, sight lines, defensive positions. The property was relatively isolated, which was both an advantage and a liability. Help would be slow to arrive in an emergency, but the long approach gave advance warning of visitors. They were completing the tour when a school bus stopped at the end of the driveway. A boy jumped off and began the long walk to the house. Tyler Morton was tall for 10, with his father's military posture already evident in the way he carried himself. Karen called out to him, and he jogged the rest of the way, eyeing the strangers with curiosity rather than fear. Tyler, these men are from the Iron Veterans. They're here to help us with our problem. The boy looked them over, his expression serious beyond his years. Are you soldiers like my dad was? We were, Buck confirmed. Different branches, different times, but the same commitment. Tyler nodded as if this made perfect sense to him. Can you stop Dalton from burning down our house? The directness of this question, spoken without fear or drama, reminded Buck powerfully of Sophie. Children in difficult situations often developed a matter-of-factness about danger that was both admirable and heartbreaking. That's what we're here to figure out, Buck told him honestly. But one way or another, we're going to make sure you and your mom are safe. As evening approached, Buck and his team retreated to a nearby campground to discuss strategy. The situation was clear enough, a Gold Star family being threatened by a local criminal with law enforcement connections. The challenge was determining the most effective response. We could set up a rotation, Razor suggested. 2 of us staying on the property at all times. Visible presence might be enough to deter further incidents. Temporary solution at best, Snake countered. We can't maintain that indefinitely, and Dalton can just wait us out. Buck considered their options. We need leverage, something that will make Dalton back off permanently. Information, said Doc, who had been quiet until now. Every small-town criminal has secrets, things they don't want exposed. Buck nodded slowly. Snake, that's your department. Start digging. See what you can find on Dalton's operations. Focus on anything that might interest federal authorities. FBI, DEA, ATF. If the local sheriff is compromised, we go over his head. On it, Snake confirmed, already pulling out his laptop. Meanwhile, Buck continued, we establish a presence at the Morton farm. Rotation of 2 veterans at a time. Visible but non-threatening. We're just visitors, friends of the family. And if Dalton escalates, Razor asked. Buck's expression hardened. Then we respond appropriately, within the law, but with all necessary force to protect the Mortons. They returned to the farm the next morning to present their plan to Karen. She listened carefully, asked pointed questions, then agreed to the arrangement. I won't lie, she told them. It's a relief not to face this alone anymore. Tyler's been having nightmares since the barn fire. We understand, Buck assured her. We've seen this kind of situation before. The key is showing Dalton that you're not isolated anymore, that there are people watching people who care what happens here. The Iron Veterans established their rotation. 2 men would remain at the farm at all times, with shifts changing every 12 hours. They were careful to present a non-threatening image to the community, helping Karen with farm chores, playing baseball with Tyler, becoming a natural part of the landscape. Meanwhile, Snake worked his magic with digital intelligence gathering. Dalton's business dealings were complex and deliberately obscured, but patterns emerged. Property purchased through shell companies, unusual cash flows, connections to known criminal elements in the nearby cities. On the third day, they got their first glimpse of Dalton himself. A black SUV with tinted windows drove slowly past the farm, pausing briefly at the entrance to the driveway where Buck and Razor were visibly working on one of their motorcycles. Reconnaissance, Razor observed as the vehicle drove away. Seeing who's here, what he's dealing with. Buck nodded. Good, let him see we're not going anywhere. That evening, Snake reported a breakthrough. Found something interesting in Dalton's shipping manifests. His construction company imports equipment from overseas, but the weights don't match what's declared. Classic pattern for smuggling. Drugs, Buck asked. Possibly, or weapons. Either way, it's federal jurisdiction. Buck considered this information. We need more, enough to interest the FBI or DEA in taking a closer look. The opportunity came sooner than expected. The next day, while Buck and Doc were on duty at the farm, Tyler approached them with an interesting piece of information. I know where Mr. Dalton keeps his secret stuff, the boy announced. Buck raised an eyebrow. What's secret stuff? At the old Miller property, the one he bought last year. There's a barn there with a special room. Kids at school talk about it, say there's guards sometimes. Buck and Doc exchanged glances. How do you know about this, Tyler? The boy shrugged. Billy Miller told me before they moved. Said his dad built the room special for Mr. Dalton. Concrete walls, metal door with a fancy lock. A secure storage facility on a remote property. Interesting. Have you ever been there, Tyler? Buck asked carefully. The boy shook his head. Mom says to stay away from anything to do with Dalton. But I know where it is. Buck ruffled Tyler's hair. Smart to listen to your mom, and smart to tell us about this. That night, the Iron Veterans held a council of war at their campsite. Tyler's information combined with Snake's research painted a compelling picture. Dalton was almost certainly using the old Miller barn to store something illegal. Something valuable enough to require security and a specialized storage room. We need visual confirmation, Buck decided. Reconnaissance only. No engagement. I'll go, Snake volunteered. I've got the surveillance equipment. Take Razor as backup, Buck ordered. Observe only. Document what you can. Then we take it to the feds. The plan was set in motion. Snake and Razor would conduct their reconnaissance the following night. Meanwhile, Buck would continue gathering intelligence on Dalton's organization and preparing their report for federal authorities. What none of them anticipated was that Dalton would make his move first. It happened shortly after midnight. Buck and Gunny were on duty at the Morton farm, taking turns keeping watch while the family slept. Buck was on the front porch scanning the darkness when he saw the distant headlights approaching. 3 vehicles moving fast down the long gravel driveway. Gunny, Buck called softly. We've got company. Gunny appeared beside him, experienced eyes quickly assessing the situation. 3 vehicles, not law enforcement, too aggressive. Buck nodded. Wake the Mortons. Get them to the safe room we prepared, then call the others. As Gunny moved to secure the family, Buck took up a position that offered both cover and a clear view of the approaching vehicles. He was unarmed except for a heavy flashlight, but years of combat experience had taught him that intelligence and positioning often mattered more than firepower. The vehicles stopped 100 yards from the house, arrayed in a semicircle with headlights illuminating the front of the farmhouse. Car doors opened. Men emerged, at least 6 of them. One carried what looked like a gasoline can. That's far enough, Buck called out, his voice carrying in the night air. He stood fully visible on the porch, deliberately presenting himself as a lone sentry. The men hesitated, conferring briefly. Then one stepped forward, a stocky figure with an authoritative bearing. Ray Dalton, Buck surmised. This doesn't concern you, old man, Dalton called. We're here to talk to Karen Morton. Private business matter. Mrs. Morton is not available, Buck replied calmly. And there's no business to discuss. She's not selling. Dalton took another step forward. I don't think you understand the situation. This property will be sold. Tonight, one way or another. I understand perfectly, Buck countered. You're trespassing on private property at midnight with gasoline cans and multiple vehicles. That doesn't look like a business discussion to me. Behind him, Buck heard Gunny return to the porch, confirming with a whispered secure that the Mortons were safely in the reinforced interior room they had prepared. The other Iron Veterans had been alerted and were en route, but they were at least 15 minutes away. Dalton signaled and his men began to spread out, moving to flank the house. Buck recognized the tactic immediately. Standard intimidation approach. Surround, isolate, escalate. Last warning, Buck called. Leave now or face the consequences. Dalton laughed. Consequences? There's 2 of you and 6 of us, and we're not exactly unarmed. To emphasize his point, one of Dalton's men raised what appeared to be a shotgun, not quite pointing it at the house but making its presence known. Buck smiled grimly. You think we haven't been expecting you? That we haven't prepared? He raised his hand and made a circular motion above his head. On cue, Gunny switched on powerful floodlights they had installed around the property. The sudden illumination caught Dalton's men by surprise, leaving them exposed and blinking in the harsh light. Simultaneously from the barn and several other outbuildings, red laser dots appeared dancing across the chests of Dalton and his men. There were no actual firearms behind those lasers, just modified laser pointers Gunny had rigged up earlier as a deterrent, but in the darkness with the sudden floodlights, the effect was convincing. Those are targeting lasers, Buck announced loudly. And you should know that everything happening right now is being recorded and live-streamed to our associates, including several law enforcement contacts. This last part was true. Snake had set up cameras around the property feeding to a secure server. If anything happened to Buck and Gunny, there would be evidence. Dalton froze, visibly reconsidering his position. His men looked to him uncertainly. You're bluffing, he said, but there was doubt in his voice. Am I? Buck countered. You've built quite an operation here, Dalton. Property development, construction, import, export. Would be a shame if federal agencies started looking too closely at your shipping manifests. At the special storage facility on the old Miller property. Dalton's expression changed, surprise and anger replacing confidence. Who the hell are you people? Just veterans looking out for a Gold Star family, Buck said. But we have resources, connections, and we've been building a file on you that would interest several federal agencies. It was a gamble. They had evidence of suspicious activity, but nothing conclusive yet. But Dalton didn't know that. The standoff stretched for several tense seconds. Then the distant sound of motorcycle engines broke the silence. Reinforcements arriving. Dalton heard it too. This isn't over, he snarled, signaling his men to fall back to their vehicles. Actually it is, Buck replied. By noon tomorrow, everything we've collected on your operation will be in the hands of the FBI, unless you make the smart play. Which is, you forget the Morton property exists. Permanently. No more offers, no more threats, no more visits. In return, our evidence stays sealed. For now. Dalton considered this as his men retreated to their vehicles. The highway development needs this land. Find another route, Buck suggested. You're a businessman. Adapt. The approaching motorcycles were visible now, headlights cutting through the darkness as the rest of the Iron veterans arrived. Dalton made his decision. The Morton place is off limits. I'll find another solution for the highway access. But your evidence better stay sealed. As long as the Mortons remain undisturbed, we have no reason to share what we know, Buck assured him. But if anything happens to them, anything at all, every federal agency with an acronym gets our complete file. Are we clear? Dalton gave a curt nod, then retreated to his SUV. The 3 vehicles turned around and drove away, their red taillights receding into the darkness. Buck let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Beside him, Gunny chuckled. Nice bluff with the laser pointers. Wasn't entirely a bluff, Buck replied as the other Iron veterans pulled up to the house. Snake has found enough to interest the feds, and sometimes perception is all that matters. He looked at the now empty driveway where Dalton and his men had stood moments before. I think the Mortons will be left alone now. Dalton's smart enough to know when the risk outweighs the reward. As the adrenaline of the confrontation faded, Buck felt a deep satisfaction. Another family protected. Another mission accomplished. The Iron Guardians program had proven its worth once again. In the farmhouse, Karen and Tyler emerged from the safe room, anxious but unharmed. Buck explained what had happened and what it meant for their future. He's really going to leave us alone? Karen asked, disbelief evident in her voice. I believe so, Buck confirmed. He's a businessman at heart. We've made threatening you bad for business. Tyler looked up at Buck with solemn eyes. Thank you for protecting us, like my dad would have. Buck placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. Your dad is still protecting you, through the Brotherhood he was part of, through the legacy he left. As dawn broke over the Morton farm, Buck stood on the porch watching the sunrise. Another battle fought, another family safeguarded. The mission continued. 6 months passed. Autumn turned to winter, and winter began its slow surrender to spring. The Iron Guardians program flourished under Buck's leadership, spanning to assist 17 Gold Star families across 3 states. What had begun as an emergency response to Sophie and Angela's situation had evolved into a structured support network with clear protocols and dedicated resources. The Morton case had enhanced the Iron Veterans' reputation within military communities. Word spread through veterans organizations, VA hospitals, and military bases. Families in need reached out sometimes directly, sometimes through referrals. The Veterans Legal Foundation became a close partner, providing essential legal services to complement the Iron Veterans' practical assistance. Through it all, Buck maintained his special connection with Sophie and Angela. Their Sunday ritual continued Sophie's community service at the clubhouse, followed by group rides when weather permitted. Angela had become a confident motorcyclist, her blue Sportster now customized with subtle silver stars in memory of David. On a crisp March morning, Buck arrived at their apartment for their weekly pickup. Sophie bounded down the steps as always, helmet in hand, eager for her day at the clubhouse. At 8 years old, she had grown taller, healthier, the shadows gone from her eyes. Regular meal security and the constant support of the Iron Veterans had transformed the frightened child Buck had met at the diner. Angela followed more slowly, her expression troubled. "Everything okay?" Buck asked as she approached. "Fine," she answered too quickly. "Just didn't sleep well." Buck studied her face. Over the months, he'd learned to read her moods, to recognize when something was bothering her. "Sophie, wait in the truck for a minute," he said. "I need to talk to your mom." Once Sophie was out of earshot, Buck turned back to Angela. "What's going on? And don't say nothing." Angela sighed, running a hand through her hair. "It's probably nothing. I got a strange call yesterday. Hang up when I answered. Then another one late last night." Buck felt a prickle of concern. Any message, heavy breathing, anything to indicate who it might be. Nothing, just silence, then disconnect. New number or one you recognize. Blocked. Couldn't see it. Buck considered this. It could be innocent wrong numbers telemarketers. But his years in special forces had taught him to trust his instincts, and something about Angela's demeanor suggested there was more to it. "Anything else unusual lately?" "Someone watching the apartment. Cars you don't recognize." Angela hesitated. "I thought I saw someone in the parking lot yesterday, sitting in a car when I came home from work. But by the time I parked, they were gone." Buck's concern deepened. "What kind of car?" "Dark sedan. Couldn't see the make or model." "Why didn't you call me right away?" Angela looked away. "I didn't want to overreact. It's been 6 months since Greg went to prison. We're doing well. I didn't want to be that person who sees threats everywhere." Buck placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Angela, listen to me. Noticing potential threats isn't paranoia. It's awareness. And it's always better to have us check out nothing than to ignore something." She nodded, looking slightly embarrassed. "You're right. I should have called. From now on, any hang-up calls, any cars you don't recognize, anything that feels off, you call me. Immediately. Promise." "I promise." Buck drove them to the clubhouse with his mind working through possibilities. Greg Thompson was still in prison, not eligible for parole for at least another year. It could be a coincidence, or it could be someone connected to Thompson, a friend or associate carrying a grudge. At the clubhouse, Buck pulled Razor aside while Sophie was busy learning how to change spark plugs with Gunny. "We might have a situation," he said quietly, explaining the phone calls in the unidentified car. Razor frowned. "Thompson's still inside, confirmed as of last week." "I know. Could be nothing. Could be someone connected to him." "Want me to set up surveillance at the apartment?" Buck nodded. "Rotating shifts. Discreet. I don't want to alarm Angela and Sophie unless necessary, but I want eyes on them." "Consider it done." "And have Snake check Thompson's visitor logs phone records. See if he's been in contact with anyone who might hold a grudge against Angela." Throughout the day, Buck maintained his usual demeanor, giving no indication to Sophie or Angela that he was concerned. But his mind kept returning to the hang-up calls, the dark sedan. Small things, perhaps coincidental, but in his experience, small things often preceded big problems. By evening, Snake had preliminary information. No unusual visitors or calls for Thompson. His prison behavior was exemplary, model prisoner, working toward early release. Nothing to indicate he was orchestrating anything from inside. "Keep digging," Buck instructed. Thompson had associates, drug connections, maybe someone doing him a favor. The next few days passed without incident. No more hang-up calls, no suspicious vehicles. Buck maintained the discreet surveillance on Angela's apartment, but began to think perhaps it had been nothing after all. Then on Thursday afternoon, Angela called. "Someone's been in my apartment," she said without preamble, her voice tight with controlled fear. Buck was instantly alert. "Are you there now? Is Sophie with you?" "No, we're both at the community center. I got a call from my neighbor saying my door was ajar. I asked her to check, and she said everything looked okay, but things aren't where I left them. Don't go back to the apartment, Buck ordered. Stay at the community center. I'm on my way. Buck arrived at the community center 20 minutes later, accompanied by Razor and Doc. Angela and Sophie were in the recreation room, Sophie playing basketball with other kids, Angela watching tensely from the sidelines. Tell me exactly what your neighbor said, Buck requested after greeting them. Angela recounted the call. Her next-door neighbor had noticed Angela's apartment door slightly open when returning from walking her dog. Concerned, she had looked inside but saw nothing obviously disturbed. She called Angela, who asked her to secure the door. But you're certain someone was inside, Buck prompted. Angela nodded firmly. My bedroom drawers were opened. I can tell from the security photo I took this morning. At Buck's raised eyebrows, she explained. After those hang-up calls, I started taking photos of certain areas before leaving each day, just to be sure. Buck felt a surge of pride. Angela had learned well. Smart, very smart. What else? Sophie's backpack was moved. It was on her bed. Now it's on the floor. Anything missing that you can tell? Not that I've noticed from the photos, but I haven't been back to check thoroughly. Buck turned to Razor. You and Doc go check the apartment. Full sweep. Look for anything that doesn't belong, especially surveillance devices. As the two men departed, Buck guided Angela to a quiet corner of the community center. This could still be innocent. Maintenance worker, neighbor with the wrong apartment. But we're going to treat it as a security breach until proven otherwise. What does that mean? Angela asked. It means you and Sophie don't go back to the apartment tonight. We move you temporarily to a secure location while we assess the situation. Is that really necessary? We can't just run every time something strange happens. Buck respected her desire for normalcy, for not disrupting Sophie's life. But security came first. Just for tonight, if Razor and Doc find nothing concerning, you can go back tomorrow. But let's be certain before taking chances. Angela reluctantly agreed. Buck arranged for them to stay at a small cabin owned by one of the Iron veterans. Located on a secluded lake property, it offered both comfort and security, a single access road, clear sight lines, and an Iron veteran living in the main house nearby. By nightfall, Angela and Sophie were settled in the cabin. Sophie thought it was an adventure, especially when Buck explained that the property had a dock where she could fish in the morning. Angela remained tense but put on a brave face for her daughter. Any word from Razor? She asked quietly when Sophie was occupied setting up her sleeping bag. Nothing concerning found so far, Buck replied. No obvious signs of who was there or why. No surveillance devices. Nothing seems to be missing. Then why move us? Why not just go home? Buck chose his words carefully. Because timing matters. Hang-up calls, then someone in your apartment, too coincidental for my comfort. Until we know, more caution is warranted. Angela studied his face. You think it's connected to Greg somehow? It wasn't a question. Buck nodded slowly. It's a possibility we have to consider, but remember, he's still in prison. If there is a connection, it's likely someone else acting on his behalf. I thought this was over, Angela said softly. I thought we were finally safe. You are safe, Buck assured her. That's why we're here. Why the Iron veterans exist, to make sure nothing happens to you and Sophie. Later that night, after Sophie had fallen asleep, Buck and Angela sat on the cabin's small porch mugs of coffee, warming their hands against the early spring chill. I never thanked you properly, Angela said suddenly. Not just for the immediate help with Greg, but for everything since. Teaching me to ride, helping me find my strength again. Buck shook his head. No thanks necessary. You did the hard part. You rebuilt your life. You became strong for Sophie. Not alone, Angela insisted. I couldn't have done it without you, without the Iron veterans. Buck was silent for a moment, uncomfortable with gratitude, as many career military men are. The Iron Guardians program has helped us as much as it's helped the families we support, he finally said. Gives us purpose, connection, the things we miss most after leaving service. Angela seemed to understand his discomfort. She changed the subject, asking about the Morton family they had helped months earlier. Buck gratefully provided an update explaining how Dalton had kept his word, leaving the family undisturbed. The highway project had been rerouted and Tyler was thriving in school. As the conversation continued, Buck found himself studying Angela's profile in the moonlight. Her strength had always been there, he realized, just buried under fear and isolation. Greg Thompson hadn't broken her, merely forced her to hide her true nature for a time. The next morning, Buck received a call from Snake. Got something on those hang-up calls, the intelligence specialist reported. They came from a prepaid cell purchased in Billings 2 weeks ago. No ID required for purchase, paid cash. Not much to go on, Buck observed. There's more. The cell has been pinging towers near Angela's workplace, Sophie's school, and the community center they frequent. Buck's blood ran cold. Someone was tracking their movements. Any way to identify the user? Working on it. Trying to access security camera footage from locations where the cell signal was strongest. Might get lucky. Keep on it. This is priority one. Buck ended the call and immediately contacted Razor to increase surveillance on Angela and Sophie. Whoever was watching them was methodical patient, not the actions of a random troublemaker or a casual associate of Thompson's. This was deliberate, targeted surveillance. By noon, Buck had relocated to the cabin, bringing additional supplies and reinforcements. 2 more Iron veterans were positioned discreetly on the property, maintaining a security perimeter, while trying not to alarm Sophie, who was happily fishing off the dock with the property owner's grandson. Angela noticed the increased security immediately. "It's worse than you initially thought," she said when Buck arrived. Not a question. Buck saw no point in sugarcoating the situation. The hang-up calls came from a prepaid phone that's been tracking your movements. Someone has been following you and Sophie, learning your routines. Angela paled but remained composed. Who? We don't know yet. Snake is working to identify them through security footage. Greg, still in prison, but he could have arranged this. Angela took a deep breath, processing the information. What do we do? For now, you stay here where it's secure. We continue investigating, and we prepare for the possibility that whoever this is might try to make contact. You think they will? Buck nodded slowly. The apartment entry, the surveillance, it feels like preparation, like they're building towards something. A kidnapping? Angela's voice trembled slightly as she glanced towards Sophie on the dock. Possible but unlikely, Buck assured her. Kidnapping is high risk, especially with the Iron veterans watching over you. More likely intimidation, or they're gathering information for some purpose we haven't identified yet. He placed a reassuring hand on her arm. Whatever it is, we're ahead of them now. They don't know we've detected their surveillance. That gives us the advantage. Later that afternoon, Snake arrived with new information. Security footage from a cafe across from Angela's workplace had captured images of a man using a cell phone at the same time as one of the hang-up calls. The image was grainy, but showed a man in his 30s wearing a baseball cap and sunglasses. Not immediately recognizable, Snake admitted, but I'm running it through facial recognition software, comparing it to known associates of Thompson. Buck studied the image. Something about the man's posture, the way he held himself, seemed vaguely familiar. Get me everything you can on this guy and widen the search. Look beyond Thompson's immediate circle. By evening, they had a name: Michael Reese, former Army, dishonorable discharge 3 years ago for violent conduct. No obvious connection to Thompson, but Reese had served in the same unit as David Williams. The connection was tenuous but significant. Why would someone who served with David be stalking his family? Angela asked when Buck shared this information. That's what we need to find out, Buck replied. Could be random coincidence, could be something else. Snake continued digging into Reese's background while Buck consulted with James Patterson, the Veterans Legal Foundation lawyer. Together, they constructed a timeline: David Williams' military service, his death in Afghanistan, the men who served with him, and subsequent events. A pattern emerged. After David's death, his unit had returned from deployment. 3 members, including Reese, had been involved in a violent incident at a bar near their base. Reese had been dishonorably discharged. The others had received less severe punishment. There's something here, Buck muttered, reviewing the reports. Some connection we're missing. Patterson agreed. The timing is suspicious. Incident occurs 4 months after Williams' death. These men served with him. Now one of them is surveilling his family years later. The next breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Sophie, overhearing parts of the adults' conversation, approached Buck while he was reviewing files on the cabin's porch. I know a Mr. Reese, she said matter-of-factly. Buck immediately set aside the files. You do? From where, Sophie? He came to our house once. Before Daddy died, they were arguing. Buck kept his voice casual despite his racing thoughts. Do you remember what they were arguing about? Sophie's forehead wrinkled in concentration. Something about money, and something about making it right. Daddy was really angry. He made Mr. Reese leave. Buck thanked Sophie and immediately shared this information with Angela, who confirmed it with additional details. Michael Reese had visited their home approximately 6 months before David's final deployment. The argument had been heated concerning money and some unnamed wrong that needed rectifying. David had refused to discuss it afterward, saying only that Reese had lost his way. The pieces were starting to connect. Buck theorized that whatever had happened between David and Reese had remained unresolved when David was killed. Now, years later, Reese was focusing on David's family for reasons still unclear. As if confirming their suspicions, a new development occurred that evening. Angela received a text message from an unknown number. "We need to talk about David and what he took. For Sophie's sake, come alone tomorrow. 10 a.m., the diner where it all began." Buck read the message with growing alarm. "This is Reese. He's making his move." "What does he mean, what David took?" Angela asked, confused and frightened. "I don't know, but we're going to find out." Buck's mind was already formulating a plan. "You're not going alone, but we'll make it appear that way. We'll control the meeting, not Reese." The Iron veterans mobilized with military precision. By morning, a comprehensive operation was in place. Angela would go to the diner as instructed, but with a concealed communications device connecting her to Buck and the others. Iron veterans would be strategically positioned inside and outside the diner, prepared to intervene if necessary. Most importantly, Sophie would remain at the cabin heavily guarded, completely isolated from any potential threat. "Remember," Buck instructed Angela as they prepared, "your only job is to get information. Find out what he wants, what he thinks David took. Don't antagonize him, but don't agree to anything either." Angela nodded, her expression resolute. The frightened woman Buck had met 6 months ago was gone, replaced by someone stronger, more determined. "I understand. Get him talking. Learn his intentions." The Devil's Pass diner looked exactly as it had 6 months earlier, when Sophie had approached the Iron veterans asking to be arrested. Angela entered alone, wearing a concealed microphone and earpiece, allowing Buck and the team to monitor the situation from a van across the street. Inside, Angela took a booth near the back, positioning herself as instructed. Back to the wall, clear view of all entrances, proximity to the kitchen exit in case a hasty retreat became necessary. 3 Iron veterans were already inside, positioned strategically, appearing to be normal customers. At precisely 10 a.m., Michael Reese entered the diner. Without hesitation, he walked directly to Angela's booth and sat down opposite her. Up close, he looked older than his years, his face weathered, eyes haunted in the way Buck had seen too often in veterans who hadn't found their way home psychologically. "Mrs. Williams," Reese greeted, her voice surprisingly soft. "Thank you for coming alone." Through her earpiece, Buck instructed, "Let him think you're alone. Build rapport before challenging anything." "You didn't give me much choice," Angela replied evenly. "Threatening my daughter, breaking into my apartment." Reese had the decency to look uncomfortable. "I never threatened Sophie. I would never hurt David's kid." "Then why the surveillance? The hang-up calls? Why break into our apartment?" In the surveillance van, Buck listened intently, noting Reese's body language through the diner's windows. Tense but not aggressive. Nervous rather than threatening. "I needed to make sure," Reese said after a pause, "that you were really in the dark about it, that you weren't part of it." "Part of what?" Angela demanded. "What is this about?" Reese leaned forward, lowering his voice. "The money. The $3 million David was holding before he died." In the van, Buck and Snake exchanged startled glances. This was unexpected and concerning. If Reese believed David Williams had been involved in something illegal, potentially involving millions of dollars, the situation was more complicated than they had anticipated. Through the earpiece, Buck advised, "Get details, dates, sources, how he knows this." Angela, to her credit, remained outwardly calm despite her obvious confusion. "I don't know anything about any money. David's finances were always transparent to me." "Not this," Reese insisted. "This was off the books. 4 of us were involved. Me, David Jenkins, and Martell. We intercepted a cash payment intended for a warlord in Kandahar. $3 million in cash." Angela's shock was evident even from across the street. "Are you saying my husband was involved in stealing money?" Reese shook his head vigorously. "Not stealing, recovering. That money was being used to fund operations against our troops. We intercepted it during an unauthorized mission. The plan was to use it to help families of our fallen comrades." Through the earpiece, Buck instructed, "Ask about timing. When did this allegedly happen?" "When was this?" Angela asked, following Buck's guidance. 3 weeks before David was killed." Reese replied, his voice catching. "We hid the money, agreed to sit on it until our deployment ended. But then David died in that IED attack. Jenkins and Martell got cold feet, wanted to walk away from the whole thing. And you didn't. That money was meant to help people. David believed that. It's why he agreed to the operation in the first place." In the van, Buck was piecing together a troubling narrative. If Reese was telling the truth, David Williams had participated in an unauthorized mission to intercept enemy funds. Such actions, while potentially well-intentioned, were strictly against military regulations and could be construed as theft or even treason, depending on the circumstances. "Where is this money now?" Angela asked, her voice steady despite the bombshell revelations. Reese spread his hands. "That's why I'm here. David was the only one who knew the final hiding place. He moved it without telling us, said it was safer that way. After he died, the three of us searched everywhere we could think of. Nothing." "And you think I know where it is?" Angela's disbelief was evident. "I think David might have left you a clue, something that wouldn't make sense until you needed it." Buck signaled to Razor, who was positioned inside the diner. The conversation was entering dangerous territory. If Reese believed Angela had access to millions in hidden cash, he might become desperate if she couldn't produce it. Through the earpiece, Buck advised caution. "Don't outright deny knowledge. Keep him talking. We're moving in closer." Angela took a sip of water, buying time. Even if such money existed, even if David was involved, why come to me now? It's been 3 years since he died. Reese's expression darkened. "Because Jenkins and Martell are dead. Jenkins overdosed last year. Martell drove his car off a cliff 3 months ago. Suicide, they said, but I don't believe it." "You think they were murdered over this money?" "I think someone else knows about it. Someone dangerous. And I think they might come after you and Sophie next if they believe you have access to it." This changed the calculation entirely. Buck signaled to the team to prepare for immediate extraction. If Reese was telling the truth, Angela and Sophie might be in danger from forces unknown, people willing to kill for the missing millions. "Mrs. Williams," Reese continued, his voice urgent now, "I don't care about the money anymore. I've made my peace with that. But David was my friend. I won't let his family be hurt because of what we did. You need protection." "I have protection," Angela said firmly. Reese looked confused. "What do you mean?" At that moment, Razor approached the table. "Everything okay here, Angela?" he asked casually, though his posture conveyed readiness for trouble. Reese tensed hand, moving instinctively toward his waistband before stopping himself. "Who's this?" "This is one of the people protecting me and Sophie," Angela explained. "The Iron Veterans. They've been watching over us since we escaped my abusive second husband." Reese looked around the diner with new awareness, noticing the other Iron Veterans positioned strategically throughout the space. "You weren't alone," he realized. "No, Mr. Reese, she wasn't," Buck said, entering the diner and approaching the table. "And she never will be again." The confrontation Buck had anticipated didn't materialize. Instead, Reese seemed almost relieved. "You're military," he observed, noting Buck's bearing. "Former Green Beret. These men are all veterans. We look after our own." Buck slid into the booth beside Angela while Razor remained standing, a protective presence. "Now let's talk about this money, the unauthorized mission, and the potential threat to Angela and Sophie." Over the next hour, Reese provided a detailed account of the operation in Afghanistan, the intercepted funds, and David Williams' role. The story was consistent with what he had already told Angela, with additional details that lent credibility. David had been reluctant initially, but agreed when the plan was framed as reclaiming funds that would otherwise be used against American troops. "The last time I saw the money, David was hiding it in an abandoned building near our forward operating base," Reese explained. "But later he told me he'd moved it, said he'd found a better location. He was killed 3 days later." "And you have no idea where he might have hidden it?" Buck pressed. "None. We searched everywhere we could access. Nothing. These deaths, Jenkins and Martell, what makes you think they weren't accidents or actual suicides? PTSD affects many veterans." Reese's expression was grim. "Jenkins wasn't a user, never touched the stuff during deployment. And Martell had just gotten engaged, was talking about starting a family." Buck considered this. Suspicious certainly, but not conclusive. "And you believe whoever killed them might target Angela and Sophie next?" "If they think David left them information about the money's location, yes." Buck exchanged glances with Angela, whose expression remained composed despite the shocking revelations about her husband. "We need to verify as much of this as possible," Buck said finally. "And in the meantime, Angela and Sophie remain under our protection." Reese nodded, seeming genuinely relieved. "That's all I want, to make sure they're safe. David would have wanted that." The meeting concluded with an uneasy truce. Reese provided his contact information and agreed to meet with Buck again after the Iron Veterans had time to investigate his claims. In return, Buck promised to share any information they uncovered about potential threats to Angela and Sophie. After Reese departed, Buck, Angela, and the Iron Veterans regrouped at a secure location to assess the situation. "Do you believe him?" Angela asked Buck, her voice steady despite the emotional bombshell of learning her husband might have been involved in an unauthorized operation. Buck considered carefully. Parts of it ring true. Special operations units sometimes operate in gray areas. The timeline fits with David's deployment and death. The deaths of the other men are concerning. But $3 million, David would have told me. Not necessarily, Buck said gently. Operational security becomes instinctive. And if he was killed before he could figure out how to handle the situation legally, he might not have had the chance. Angela was quiet for a long moment. If it's true, if David really was involved in taking this money, does that change who he was? What he stood for? Buck thought about his own military career, the complex moral terrain of combat operations, the decisions made in the fog of war. David was a ranger, elite soldier. His record speaks for itself. Whatever happened with this money, I believe his intentions were honorable. Angela nodded, drawing strength from Buck's certainty. So what now? Now we investigate. Verify what we can of Reese's story. Determine if there's a credible threat to you and Sophie. And perhaps most importantly, we try to find out if David really did leave some clue about the money's location. Where would we even begin to look? Angela wondered. Buck smiled slightly. We start with what we know. David was methodical, detail-oriented. If he hid something for you to find, it would be somewhere meaningful, somewhere secure. The safety deposit box, Angela said suddenly. David set one up before his last deployment. I checked it after he died, but there was just our marriage certificate, his will, some family photos. Worth checking again, Buck suggested. Sometimes we don't recognize clues until we know what we're looking for. The next day, Angela visited the bank while Buck and Razor provided discreet security. The safety deposit box contained exactly what Angela remembered: legal documents, family photos, military service records. Nothing that obviously pointed to hidden millions. As Angela was replacing the items, Buck noticed something odd about one of the photos, a family picture taken at their home shortly before David's final deployment. May I? He asked gently, taking the photo. It showed David, Angela, and Sophie in front of their house. But the angle was strange, capturing an unusual amount of the property rather than focusing tightly on the family. This is an odd composition for a family photo, Buck observed, almost as if the photographer was more interested in capturing the location than the people. Angela looked more closely. David set up the camera that day, used a timer. He was very particular about the angle, kept adjusting it. Buck studied the background, the house, the yard, a large oak tree, a shed partially visible at the edge of the frame. This shed, is it still on the property? Angela nodded. Yes, though I rarely go in there. It was David's space, his tools, equipment from his hunting trips. Buck and Angela exchanged looks of sudden understanding. A secure location, a place Angela would know but rarely visit. A place captured deliberately in what appeared to be a simple family photo. I think, Buck said carefully, we should visit your old house. The property had been rented out while Angela and Sophie lived in the apartment, but the tenants had recently moved out, leaving it temporarily vacant. Angela still owned it, unable to bring herself to sell David's family home, despite the painful memories associated with Greg Thompson's abuse. They arrived the next morning, Buck, Razor, Snake, and Angela. Sophie remained at the secure cabin, protected by the other Iron veterans. The house stood empty, echoing with memories both good and bad. The shed was at the rear of the property, exactly as shown in the photograph. A simple wooden structure, weathered by time and elements. Inside, David's tools hung neatly on pegboards. Fishing rods and hunting gear occupied one corner. Everything covered in a fine layer of dust, undisturbed since before his death. Where would he hide something in here? Angela wondered, looking around. Buck surveyed the space with a professional eye. Not on the walls, too exposed. Not in those storage containers, too obvious. Look for something structural, something that doesn't quite belong. They searched methodically, checking every inch of the small building. It was Snake who found a section of flooring that, when tapped, produced a subtly different sound than the surrounding boards. Here, he called. This sounds hollow. Together, they removed the workbench that partially covered the area, then carefully pried up the floorboards. Beneath was a small space containing a military-grade waterproof case secured with a combination lock. Angela stared at it, her hand trembling slightly. I never knew this was here. The combination, Buck prompted gently. I don't know, Angela admitted. David never mentioned anything like this. Think, Buck encouraged. Something meaningful to both of you. Something you'd remember but others wouldn't guess. Angela thought for a long moment, then carefully turned the dials. The case opened with a soft click. Inside was not the cash they had expected, but a USB drive, a handwritten letter in a small notebook. The letter was addressed to Angela in David's handwriting. With trembling fingers, she unfolded it and began to read aloud. My dearest Angela, if you're reading this, something has happened to me and you found my final message. The USB drive contains evidence of an operation I participated in 3 weeks ago. We intercepted $3 million in cash that was being used to fund attacks against our forces. My intention was to ensure this money helped the families of fallen soldiers, not those who killed them. But I realize now that my participation, however well-intentioned, crossed a line. The money is no longer in Afghanistan. I've moved it to a secure location known only to me. The notebook contains encrypted coordinates. Only you know the key to decode them. Angela paused, her voice breaking. Buck placed a supportive hand on her shoulder as she continued. I'm sorry for keeping this from you. I believed I was doing the right thing, but the right way matters as much as the right reason. When I return home, I plan to surrender the money to proper authorities and accept whatever consequences follow. If I don't make it back, this responsibility falls to you. I trust you to do what's right. All my love, always David. The shed fell silent as the full weight of David's confession settled over them. Buck was the first to speak. He was going to turn himself in, return the money. Angela nodded, tears streaming down her face. That was David, always trying to do the right thing even when it meant facing consequences. Buck examined the notebook. Each page contained what appeared to be random numbers and letters. This encryption, any idea what the key might be? Angela thought for a moment, then smiled sadly. Our song, the one we danced to at our wedding. David always said those lyrics were our secret code. With Angela's guidance, Snake began working on decrypting the coordinates. The USB drive contained video evidence of the operation confirming Reese's account in every detail. It also contained David's detailed notes about why he'd participated and his subsequent regret. By evening, they had decrypted the location of a private storage facility 2 states away, rented under an alias David had created. The entry code was based on Sophie's birth date. What do we do now? Angela asked, looking to Buck for guidance. Buck considered their options carefully. Legally, this money should be turned over to military authorities. It's technically evidence in an unauthorized operation. That's what David wanted to do, Angela agreed. But, Buck continued, we need to be careful. If Reese is right about Jenkins and Martell being killed over this, whoever is responsible might be watching for any sign of the money surfacing. The Iron Veterans developed a careful plan. They would retrieve the money document. Everything then worked with James Patterson at the Veterans Legal Foundation to arrange a secure handover to the appropriate authorities. Throughout the process, Angela and Sophie's safety would remain the top priority. 4 days later, the money was recovered exactly where David's coordinates had indicated. $3 million in cash sealed in waterproof containers. Just as importantly, they recovered additional evidence David had compiled, suggesting the money had been part of a larger corruption scheme involving certain officials who had been skimming from funds intended for Afghan reconstruction. James Patterson arranged a meeting with trusted contacts at the Department of Defense Inspector General's office. The evidence along with the money would be turned over through proper channels. Angela would receive immunity from prosecution in exchange for her cooperation, and David's role would be contextualized as that of a soldier who made a mistake but intended to correct it. Most importantly, with the money recovered and soon to be in official hands, the threat to Angela and Sophie would diminish significantly. Whoever had killed Jenkins and Martell would have no reason to target David's family once the money was surrendered to authorities. One loose end remained Michael Reese. Buck arranged to meet him at a neutral location to share what they had discovered and their plan moving forward. David left a confession, Buck explained, and instructions to return the money to proper authorities. That's what we're doing. Reese nodded slowly, seemingly at peace with the decision. That sounds like David, always trying to make things right. There's something else, Buck added. David's evidence suggests this money was part of a larger corruption scheme. Names are named, people with significant power. If they're behind what happened to Jenkins and Martell, I could be next, Reese finished grimly. The Veterans Legal Foundation can arrange protection for you too. Temporary identity relocation if necessary. Reese considered this. I've been looking over my shoulder for 3 years. Maybe it's time to stop running. In the weeks that followed, events moved quickly. The money and evidence were turned over to military investigators. Angela provided a full statement about discovering David's hidden message. The broader corruption investigation gained momentum with several arrests made in both military and civilian contracting sectors. Angela and Sophie returned to their apartment, though they spent increasing amounts of time at the Iron Veterans Clubhouse. The Sunday ritual of Sophie's community service and Angela's motorcycle rides continued. Slowly, the tension and fear that had gripped them began to fade. On a warm May afternoon, Buck and Angela sat on the clubhouse porch watching Sophie help Gunny tune up his motorcycle. "She's really got a knack for mechanics," Buck observed proudly. "Gunny says she's a natural." Angela smiled. "David would be amazed. He could barely change a light bulb." They shared a laugh, comfortable in each other's company. The events of the past months had forged a bond between them that transcended ordinary friendship. "What happens now?" Angela asked after a companionable silence. "With the Iron Guardians program with everything." Buck gazed across the clubhouse grounds, where several Iron veterans were teaching motorcycle safety to a group of teenagers from military families. "We keep going, keep building. The need isn't going away." "And us, Sophie and me," Buck turned to face her, seeing the question in her eyes that went beyond the Iron Guardians program. "That's entirely up to you. You've rebuilt your life beautifully. You're strong, independent. You don't need us or me anymore." Angela's hand found his fingers intertwining with quiet certainty. "Need and want are different things, Buck." Buck felt something unlock inside him, a door he'd kept firmly shut since losing his own family to the demands of military service years ago. "Yes, they are." Across the yard, Sophie looked up and waved, her face bright with the uncomplicated joy of a child who finally felt secure. Buck and Angela waved back, united in their commitment to protecting that hard-won security. The mission continued, but now it was something more than duty, more than honoring a fallen soldier's memory. It was about building something new from the foundations of the past. A family, a future, a legacy that David Williams would have been proud to see. In the distance, thunder rumbled as storm clouds gathered on the horizon. But here in this moment, there was only sunshine, the promise of tomorrow, and the knowledge that some journeys end exactly where they're meant to.